Thank you, Marshall, for the wonderful music this morning. Several weeks ago, Pastor Fred preached about the founder of our Methodist faith, John Wesley, who we've been talking about this morning. Today, I'm going to carry on the history of Reverend Wesley and the Methodist Church as it relates to my ancestors and family history. Many of you have been Methodist, as Mary Louise said, from cradle to grave or for many generations, but many of you are new to our denomination. Several denominations have founding fathers or mothers. Henry VIII founded the Church of England, as we all know, when he broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. It was also referred to as the King's Church. Martin Luther founded the Lutheran Church and started the Protestant Reformation 500 years ago this year. John Knox founded the Presbyterian Church. Joseph Smith founded the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. John and Charles Wesley founded the Methodist Church in the first half of the 18th century. When they were students at Oxford, they were ordained as priests in the Church of England, where their father was also a vicar, as Valerie talked about this morning. John Wesley lived a very long and incredibly productive life. He lived from 1703 to 1791, and he preached until he died. Pastor Fred referred to him as one of the greatest evangelists since St. Paul. Charles, his brother, was a prolific writer of hymns sung today in churches of all denominations. In fact, when I've been in the Catholic Church with my husband Steve, who's sitting here, they sing more Charles Wesley hymns than we do. John and Charles were unhappy with the focus of the Church of England. Pastor Fred talked about this, but in the early 1700s, the country was a society in ruins, with decadence, drunkenness, and little hope. The Wesleys felt that the church was not addressing the ills of the people, or trying to help the needs of others, or dealing with social issues such as human slavery. The Church of England was the King's Church, and was the bastion of the royalty, the elite, and the rich. The clergy and members had little interest in helping the poor and needy throughout the British Isles. Wesley believed that the living core of the Christian faith was revealed in Scripture, illumined by tradition, vivified in personal experience, and confirmed by reason. Methodism gained momentum when Wesley took to open-air preaching, persuading people that they could, in this life, reach a state where the love of God ruled their hearts. Under his guidance, Methodists became leaders in many other social justice issues of the day besides slavery. He fought against many social ills and, as I said, was very opposed to slavery. The 2006 movie Amazing Grace is the story of William Wilberforce and his mentor, John Newton, and their efforts to end slavery in England. John Newton was the former slave ship captain who was converted, became an evangelical Anglican cleric, and wrote my favorite hymn, Amazing Grace, which we sang today. Thanks, Marshall. It's a great hymn, and it's just a really wonderful anthem for our faith. Wilberforce was converted under Wesley's ministry. Wesley's last letter before he died in 1791 was to Wilberforce to push for the abolition of slavery in England. John and Charles had spent 2 years in Savannah, Georgia between 1735 and 1737, which Valerie mentioned in her time. This was at the invitation of General Oglethorpe, and they were to be the chaplains of the Georgia colony. It was a disastrous trip, which we won't go into today, but it was disastrous. But they saw firsthand American slavery. In Wesley's letter to Wilberforce, he said, "Go on, in the name of God and the power of his might, till even American slavery, the vilest that ever saw the sun, shall vanish away before it." Cornwall is the county at the southwest tip of England. And this is what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of my time. For centuries, from the time of the Romans, the principal occupations of the Cornish were fishing and mining, tin, copper, and other elements. All of my ancestors were Cornish miners. Cornwall has a tradition of Celtic Christianity, like the Scots, Welsh, and the Irish. In England, Saxon and Viking invaders pushed the Celts into their western strongholds of Wales and Cornwall. They had their own Celtic languages, which survive today. The Cornish had loved the ceremony and pageantry of the Catholic faith, and they never felt that the Church of England met their spiritual needs. By the 1700s, the Cornish were a non-religious, drunken, poor, and criminal society. There are many links with the ministry of John Wesley and his fellow preachers, whose labors led to the evangelical revival of Cornwall. He was first invited to Cornwall by a Bristol sea captain in 1743. And Karen Rice just told me this morning that that was basically where Charles and John Wesley lived in Bristol when they were doing their ministries throughout the British Isles. And they've been to the church where he practiced and where he lived. The Wesleys had a very rough reception, and his brother Charles was severely assaulted in St. Ives, which is down around the tip. In due course, the miners and fishermen warmed to his message, and Cornwall became his most fruitful field of labor and the county most affected by his influence. He brought them hope and faith for their future. Cornwall took to Methodism like no other county in England. The Methodist principles of scriptural piety, personal discipline, and self-improvement became Cornish principles. Later on, the influences of the Wesley brothers were among the factors that helped our ancestors succeed in America and other mining countries. The Wesleys preached against smuggling, wrecking, wrestling, drinking, and gambling. John and Charles were committed to certain practices: preaching without regard to parish bounds, preaching out of doors in unconsecrated houses, preaching by laymen, the building of preaching houses, establishing schools, and organizing united societies. Methodist societies were established throughout Cornwall, and they met in private homes. Through these societies, the Methodist faith grew exponentially. Both men and women were encouraged to become preachers. Methodists also set up societies to educate children and adults and to help people in distress. By the end of the 1700s and John Wesley's death, Methodism was the dominant denomination in Cornwall. He preached 32 times in Cornwall over 48 years. By the 19th century, the Methodist Church had overtaken the Church of England in followers. Every village had at least one Methodist chapel or church. The membership of the Methodist Church became so big that in 1880, the Church of England decided to build a cathedral on the site of St. Mary's Church in Truro, which is the county seat. To stop the growth of Methodism and encourage new membership in the Church of England. It's a beautiful cathedral, and I had the good fortune to attend there with my friends from Cornwall, Michael and Jillian. And this was also, St. Mary's was the church where my great-great-grandparents had been married in 1842 before they came to America. John Wesley loved preaching outside to large crowds. I recently read the book, John Wesley in Cornwall, which is a compilation of his journal entries about his 32 visits to the county. He preached in all of the locations where my ancestors lived. His most famous location, where he preached often, is what you see in the picture. It's called Gwinnett Pit. It's near Redruth. It was an abandoned mining site that became an open-air theater and had great acoustics. Many of my ancestors lived near here, so I'm quite certain that they would have heard Wesley preach at Gwinnett Pit. When he first preached there in 1762, he said afterwards, "About 5 o'clock in the evening, I preached at Gwinnett. I believe God enabled me to speak so that even those who stood farthest off could hear distinctly. I shall scarce see our larger congregation till we meet in heaven." In 1773, 32,000 people saw him preach here, which is an incredible amount. Originally, Gwinnett was an abandoned mining site. In 1806, it was remodeled by a mining engineer and his crew as a memorial to Wesley. A service has been held here every Whit Monday since 1807, and it's used for many other functions. Today, Gwinnett Pit is a Cornish Mining World Heritage Site, and it's managed and maintained by the English Methodist Church. I visited here on my trip in 2014 with my 3 cousins, who you see in the picture. It was a very powerful experience for me to be in the same location as many of my ancestors when they heard John Wesley preach here centuries ago. By the early to mid-1800s, skilled Cornish miners were being recruited to immigrate to the United States, Canada, South America, Australia, and other mining countries. Mines in Cornwall were dying out. My mother and father's ancestors came to southwest Wisconsin between 1840 to 1850 to mine lead. Some moved on to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where Carol Witt is from, and then on to the Gold Rush country in California, Utah, Montana, and even Globe, Arizona. Though the Cornish were largely illiterate, they put great store in literacy and education. The immigrant generation identified education with Methodism, and they wanted their American-raised children to have more education and more opportunity than they had. In the early formations of villages, schools were among the first buildings to be built and often doubled as a church until a proper one could be built. Many miners were Irish or Italian, but they were Catholic. In a number of states, the first Protestant congregations were in mining communities and were founded by Cornish Methodists. They formed societies like they had in England, and they had many circuit-riding preachers. My first ancestor to arrive in Wisconsin, George Sims, who arrived in 1842, was a circuit rider around Dodgeville, Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, the oldest Protestant congregation in the whole state is the former Methodist Episcopal Church in Mineral Point, home of many of my ancestors. The original log church was built in 1834. This is the church that replaced the original. It was built in 1871, and it is now the First Methodist Church. This primitive Methodist church in Mineral Point was built in 1849, and is where my immigrant great-great-grandparents worshiped when they arrived in 1848. The primitive Methodists, in many places, broke away from the Methodist Episcopal Church, and in this case it was in 1848 over a dispute. The third oldest Methodist church in Wisconsin is in Linden, and it was built in 1851, and my great-grandfather, who immigrated, helped build it. It is just a stunning church. It was restored about 15 years ago, and it looks very much like the churches you see in Cornwall and in England. They're stone, have a second story, and a U-shaped balcony. If you've ever been to the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, it looks sort of like that. This has been a very active congregation for 165 years, and it's a church my father grew up in. It still has a very active, and this town is about 500 people, but it's still very active. The next church, the Plum Grove Primitive Methodist Church between Mineral Point and Dodgeville, was located adjacent to our family farm on the border. And my grandfather was raised in this church with his many brothers and sisters. The oldest Protestant congregation in Arizona is my prior church, Prescott United Methodist. This is a picture of the first church, which is now one of the Presbyterian churches in Prescott. I think Prescott Methodist started in 1862, but you know, that was a mining community, and again, miners started the church. This is the current church, which isn't as pretty as the old one. Miners were small and stocky, so they could get into small shafts of the mines. As dangerous as it was, miners loved their work. If you've ever done the Bisbee mining tour in Bisbee, Arizona, you'll see this from the retired miners who do the tours. Last week, we were in Park City, Utah, and we toured the Park City Museum. They have a mining exhibit, and it was stated that 1 of every miners during their career was injured, and 1 of every 8 died in the mines. Many of my ancestors died at a young age, leaving large families without a father. The Cornish brought many traditions and foods with them, as all immigrants do. Notably, we love Cornish pasties, and Carol Witt and I are experts on Cornish pasties. We also love saffron buns and Cornish tea biscuits. This morning I've made tea biscuits for our hospitality time. They're also known as Irish or Cornish scones. Tea biscuits and pasties are staples at Methodist Church functions and fundraisers in southwest Wisconsin, as Roger and Fern both know. Cornish Americans, as my cousins and I refer to ourselves, are very proud of our heritage and our faith. Traditions, history, and legends have been carried forth by generations for Cornish families all over the world. In my genealogy research, I've met Cornish cousins from England, from Australia, and other countries, and some of them are watching today. John Wesley, Methodism, and Cornish culture continue to live on in Cornish communities throughout the United States, in Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula, the Gold Rush Country in California, and many other former mining locations. This is the role of John Wesley, who inspired our denomination. Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. And all God's people said, Amen. Thank you. And now we will